I was the 16th maid he hired in 2 months. That's what the house manager whispered to me before she handed over the black uniform and the thin silver name badge that read simply, Naomi. 16. 15 women had already walked through those iron gates and walked out again, most of them in tears, one of them shouting, one of them silent like she had left something important behind. The staff talked about it like a storm season. Nobody knew when it would end, only that it always did. "Don't take it personal," the manager told me quietly as we stood beneath a chandelier the size of a small car. "He fires everyone." I nodded. I needed this job. The mansion sat on a hill overlooking the city like it owned the skyline. Glass walls, marble floors that echoed every footstep, paintings that probably cost more than my entire neighborhood combined. Even the air smelled expensive, polished wood and something faintly floral, artificial but intentional. And somewhere inside all of that wealth was a man who couldn't keep a maid for more than 4 days. His name was Richard Halston, billionaire, tech investor, divorced twice, ruthless in business, ruthless in everything from what I'd heard. I met him 30 minutes into my first shift. He came down the floating staircase while I was dusting the railing. He didn't look at me at first. He was speaking into his phone. "Then fire him," he said calmly. "If he can't deliver, he's useless." He ended the call and finally noticed me. His eyes moved over me in a quick, clinical sweep. Not inappropriate, not curious, just assessing. "You're new." "Yes, sir." "They told you I don't tolerate mistakes." "Yes, sir." "Good." That was it. No welcome, no introduction, just terms. I had worked in wealthy homes before. I knew the rules. Stay quiet, be efficient, don't be seen unless needed. But this house felt different. It didn't feel lived in. It felt staged. Perfect. Cold. By lunchtime, I understood why the others hadn't lasted. He inspected everything. Not casually. Not occasionally, obsessively. He ran his finger along shelves, checked corners for dust, adjusted cushions by millimeters. Once he called a maid back because a towel fold wasn't symmetrical. "You're fired," he had told her right there in the hallway, according to the gardener. No warning, no second chance, gone. That afternoon, I cleaned his study. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city below. His desk was immaculate except for one framed photograph turned slightly away from view. I didn't touch it, but I noticed it. And I noticed something else too. The house was too clean already. There wasn't 15 maids worth of mess in that place. So why keep firing them? That question stayed with me as I polished the kitchen counters. The chef, Mateo, leaned closer while chopping herbs. "You won't last the week," he murmured, not cruelly, just factual. "Why?" I asked. He shrugged. "Nobody does." That night, I lay in my small rented apartment staring at the ceiling fan and thinking about the look in Richard Halston's eyes. It wasn't anger. It wasn't arrogance. It was expectation. Like he was waiting for something or someone. The next morning, he called me into the living room. There was a single fingerprint on the glass coffee table, barely visible. He didn't yell. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at it, then at me. "This is unacceptable. I'll fix it right away, sir." "You should have seen it." "I'm sorry." He stepped closer. "Sorry doesn't create excellence." There it was, not rage, standards, extreme ones. "I don't pay for average," he continued. "If you want to stay here, you will be perfect." The word hung in the air like a test. Perfect. Nobody is perfect. Nobody can be, but I didn't say that. Instead, I nodded. And something inside me decided I wasn't leaving. Not because of pride, not because I needed the paycheck. Because something about this man felt broken. And broken people don't fire 15 maids in 2 months over fingerprints. They're looking for something else. The humiliation came on day 3. He invited business partners over. Important ones, investors, sharp suits and sharper smiles. I served drinks quietly. One of the men looked at me and asked, "How many degrees does it take to polish a glass like that?" The table laughed. I kept my face neutral. "Careful," Richard said lightly. "She might outsmart you." They laughed again, assuming it was a joke. He didn't smile. Later that night, after they left, he walked into the kitchen where I was washing Crystal. "You missed a spot earlier," he said. "I'll rewash them." "You shouldn't have to rewash anything." His tone wasn't cruel, it was surgical. "I expect precision." "I understand." He studied me for a long moment. "Why haven't you quit yet?" The question surprised me. "I need the job." "That's not what I asked." Silence stretched between us. "Because," I said slowly, "I think you're testing something." His jaw tightened slightly. "Don't assume." But I saw it, a flicker. For the first time, I saw something crack through the billionaire mask, not anger, pain. The next morning, I found the photograph in his study turned face up. It was a little girl, maybe 8 years old, braided hair, bright smile, standing in front of this very house. And next to her, a woman in a maid uniform, black, holding the girl's hand. I stared at the photo longer than I should have, and I understood. He wasn't firing maids because they were imperfect. He was firing them because none of them were her. And for the first time since I walked into that mansion, I realized I wasn't there by accident. If you're still listening to this story, pause for a moment and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this deserve to be heard. And tell me in the comments your name and the city you're watching from. I read them. Every single one. Because what happened next changed everything. And it started with a single question I asked him on day 4. "Sir, who is she?" He didn't answer me right away. He stood there in the doorway of his study, the early morning light cutting sharp lines across the marble floor, across his suit, across that photograph still resting face up on his desk. For a second, I thought I had gone too far. "I asked you a question," he said quietly. "Yes, sir." "Why are you touching things that don't concern you?" "I wasn't touching it," I said gently. "I just saw her." Silence. His jaw tightened the way it did when he was trying to lock something down inside himself. "That," he said finally, walking past me and turning the frame back around, "is none of your business." I nodded, but I didn't move, and something in my stillness must have irritated him. "You're here to clean," he said, "not to think." The words hit harder than they should have. Not to think. I had heard that before. From teachers who assumed I wasn't capable. From customers who assumed I wasn't educated. From managers who assumed I didn't have ambition. It's amazing how quickly people reduce you to the uniform you're wearing. "Yes, sir," I said, but inside something burned. That day he inspected every room twice. He found lint where there was none, a streak invisible to the naked eye, a vase turned 1 degree off center. Each time his voice stayed calm, controlled. "Do better. Be precise. Excellence or nothing." By mid-afternoon, the other staff wouldn't look at me, not because they disliked me, because they were waiting for the inevitable. "You're fired." It was almost a tradition in that house. Around 5 o'clock, he called everyone into the main hall. All the staff lined up, chef, gardener, house manager, driver, and me. He walked slowly down the line like an inspector general. "You represent this house," he said. "You represent me. Mistakes reflect weakness." He stopped in front of me. The air felt thinner. "In the east wing," he continued, "there is a mirror with water streaks." I blinked. "I cleaned that mirror twice." "Then you didn't clean it correctly." My cheeks burned. "I can fix it right now." "That's not the point." The others stood frozen. He stepped closer. "I hired you to eliminate problems, not to respond to them." The humiliation wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It was controlled, measured, public, and that made it worse. "I don't tolerate mediocrity," he finished. Then he turned and walked away. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. I went to the east wing alone. The mirror looked flawless. I leaned closer. Nothing. Then I understood. The streak wasn't water, it was old, faint, embedded in the glass itself. No amount of cleaning would remove it, and that's when something clicked in my mind. He wasn't looking for perfection. He was looking for impossibility. Later that evening, he called me into the dining room. There was a folder on the table. "You have two options," he said without looking up. "Resign tonight with a full week's pay, or stay and meet my standards." "What are your standards?" I asked. He finally looked at me. "They are non-negotiable." "That's not specific." His eyes sharpened. "Careful," but I didn't back down. "Sir, with respect, you're firing people for flaws that don't exist, for things that can't be fixed. And you believe you understand my house better than I do?" "No," I said softly. "I believe you're testing something else." The air changed. His expression shifted from irritation to something else. Suspicion. "What do you think I'm testing?" My heart pounded. "I think you're seeing who stays." Silence, thick, heavy. "You think this is about loyalty?" he asked. "I think it's about loss." The word slipped out before I could stop it. His face went completely still. "You're done," he said coldly. The words dropped like a blade. And there it was. The moment every other maid had faced. I felt the sting in my chest. The rent due next week, my mother's medication, the job I needed. But instead of begging, I did something none of them had done. I didn't move. "If I'm fired," I said calmly, "may I ask one final question?" He hesitated. "One? What happened to her?" His hand tightened on the folder. For the first time, the billionaire mask cracked completely. Pain, raw and unguarded. "She died," he said flatly. The room seemed to tilt. "I'm sorry." "So am I," he looked away, staring out the massive windows into the darkening city. "She worked here," he continued. "For years, she raised my daughter while I built everything you see around you." His voice wasn't loud, it was distant. "My daughter loved her more than she loved me." The confession hung in the air like something sacred. "She was perfect," he said quietly, and there it was again. Perfect. "When she passed, my daughter stopped speaking for 3 months. I swallowed. "And then?" I asked gently. "She left." The word shattered something invisible. "She lives with her mother now, across the country." The mansion suddenly felt less like a palace and more like a mausoleum. "You fire them," I said softly, "because they're not her." His eyes snapped to mine. "You don't get to analyze me." "I'm not analyzing you," I said. "I'm telling you the truth." He stepped closer. "You think you're different?" "No. Then why are you still standing here?" "Because I see you," I thought, but I didn't say that. Instead, I said, Because someone needs to tell you this house isn't empty because of bad maids. It's empty because you never grieved. The words hung between us, dangerous, unforgivable, and for a long moment I thought he would explode. Instead, he sat down, just like that. A billionaire who could buy cities, sitting in silence like a man who had finally run out of strength. "You don't know anything about grief," he said quietly. And that's when I made the mistake of answering honestly. "My father died when I was 12, I said. "My mother cleaned houses to survive. I started working at 14. I know what it's like to lose someone who felt like home." His gaze lifted slowly. "And yet you're here cleaning mine." "Yes," I said, "because it's a job, not my identity." That landed. I saw it land. And for the first time since I walked into that mansion, he didn't look at me like staff. He looked at me like a person. "You're not fired," he said finally. But it wasn't victory. Not yet, because something in his expression told me the real storm hadn't started. If you're still watching this story, take a second and like this video. It helps more than you know. And comment your name and where you're watching from. I want to see how far this message travels, because what happened next wasn't just about a maid. It was about a secret Richard Halston had buried so deep that even he forgot it was there. And when it surfaced, it didn't just shake the mansion, it shook his empire. That night, the house didn't feel cold, it felt watchful. After our conversation in the dining room, Richard didn't dismiss me. He didn't bark new orders. He didn't inspect corners or measure towel folds. He simply stood by the window for a long time, staring out at a city that glittered like something he owned but couldn't feel. I returned to cleaning because that was still my role. But the silence between us had changed. It wasn't sharp anymore. It was fragile. Around 10, the house manager left. The chef left. One by one, the staff disappeared until it was just him and me in a mansion built for echoes. I was polishing the silver in the kitchen when I heard something break upstairs. Not loud, but deliberate. I climbed the staircase slowly. His study door was open. The photograph frame lay shattered on the floor, glass everywhere. He stood near his desk, shoulders tense, breathing hard like he'd just run a mile. "I told you not to touch things that aren't your business," he said without turning around. "I didn't," I replied quietly. He finally looked at me and his eyes were wet, not crying, but close. "I can't keep doing this," he muttered. "Doing what?" "Pretending this house isn't haunted." The word hit me in the chest. Haunted. He wasn't angry. He was drowning. "I built everything," he continued. "Every inch of this empire. And the only person who cared about none of it is gone." I stepped carefully around the broken glass. "She didn't care about your money," I said gently. "She cared about your daughter." His jaw tightened. "She taught her how to braid her hair, how to pray at night, how to laugh when I was too busy closing deals." He swallowed. "And when she got sick, I wasn't here." There it was, the guilt, the real reason 15 women couldn't last more than 4 days. "You think firing people fixes that?" I asked softly. "I think control is better than regret." That sentence told me everything. For the first time, he wasn't the billionaire. He was a father who missed a goodbye. I crouched down and began picking up the broken glass. "You don't have to do that," he said automatically. "I know," but I kept gathering the pieces. "Her name was Lillian," he said suddenly. The name floated in the air like something sacred. "She worked for us for 11 years. 11 years, not 2 months, not 4 days. She saved my daughter's life once, he added. I looked up. What happened? She noticed something the doctors missed, an allergy. If she hadn't insisted, his voice trailed off. She was the only one who ever challenged me, he said quietly. The only one who wasn't afraid. I let that settle. And when she got sick, cancer, he said flatly, late stage, and you weren't here. No, the silence stretched again, not hostile, heavy. Did you ever tell her thank you? I asked. He didn't answer, and that was answer enough. The next morning, something strange happened. He didn't inspect, he didn't criticize, he didn't even call me into a room to analyze a speck of dust. Instead, he left early for meetings. And I did something risky. I searched. Not through drawers, not through private documents, but through public records. The internet remembers everything. It didn't take long to find Lillian. There was a small obituary, no mention of the Halston family, no grand tribute. Just a brief paragraph about a devoted caregiver who loved children and believed kindness was wealth. I stared at the screen for a long time. Kindness was wealth. That phrase stayed with me all day. When he returned that evening, I was waiting in the kitchen. I'd like to show you something, I said. His eyes narrowed slightly. I don't recall granting permission for initiative. This isn't cleaning, I replied. It's something else. He hesitated, then followed me to the dining table. I placed the printed obituary in front of him. He didn't touch it at first. Then slowly he read. His expression didn't change, but his breathing did. They didn't mention us, he said quietly. Maybe she didn't want that, I replied. He stared at the line about kindness being wealth. She deserved more, he muttered. Yes. The word came out stronger than I expected. He looked at me sharply. What are you implying? That firing Maids won't honor her. His jaw tightened again. You're crossing lines. Then fire me, I said calmly. The words hung there, bold, dangerous, but true. He studied me for a long moment. Why do you care? He finally asked. Because I've seen what bitterness does to people, I thought. Because I've watched grief turn into cruelty. Because I refuse to let someone else's pain become someone else's punishment. But I didn't say all that. I care, I said quietly, because someone once showed me kindness when they didn't have to, and it changed my life. He looked at me differently then, not as staff, not as a problem, as a possibility. You're not like the others, he said slowly. No, I agreed, I'm not. He stood up, walked toward the window again. You think you can fix this? No, I said honestly, but I think I can help you stop breaking it. The city lights flickered below us. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he said something I didn't expect. My board meets here next week. I blinked. And they think I'm unstable. That surprised me. You fired 15 maids, I said carefully. That might be part of it. His lips twitched slightly, almost a smile. They're looking for reasons to push me out. The empire, there it was, the crack beneath the surface. They want proof, he continued. Proof I can't manage my own household. And suddenly everything made sense. The inspections, the obsession, the perfection. He wasn't just grieving, he was being watched. You think they're monitoring you? I asked. I know they are. A chill ran through me. So the firings are evidence, he said. And you, he added slowly, are the 16th variable. The weight of that settled heavily. I'm not here to be a variable, I said. He looked at me sharply. Then what are you here for? I met his gaze. To remind you who you are before they decide for you. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't fragile. It was charged. Something was building, not just inside him, inside the walls of that mansion. And I had the feeling the board meeting next week wasn't going to go the way anyone expected. If you're still listening, pause for a second and subscribe. Because the next part of this story is where everything shifts. And tell me your name and the city you're watching from in the comments. I want to know who's walking this journey with me. Because when those board members stepped into that mansion, they weren't prepared for what a maid was about to do. The morning of the board meeting, the mansion felt like it was holding its breath. I woke up earlier than usual, even though I barely slept. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and the sky outside the staff quarters window was still washed in pale gray. For a moment, I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of a house too large for one man. Today wasn't just about polished floors and folded linens. It was about survival, his, and maybe mine too. By 7, I was already moving through the halls, adjusting the smallest details. Not because he demanded perfection this time, but because I wanted there to be no distractions. No fingerprints, no crooked frames, no invisible streaks he could use as armor. The dining table was set for 12, water glasses aligned, chairs evenly spaced. The chandelier dimmed just enough to feel warm instead of interrogative. When he came downstairs, he looked different, not softer, but steadier. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored like authority itself. His expression was controlled but not brittle. He stopped when he saw me adjusting the final place setting. "You don't have to overdo it," he said. "I'm not," I replied. "I'm eliminating excuses." His eyes held mine for a moment, then he nodded once. At 10 sharp, the first black car pulled through the gates. By 10:15, the mansion was full of sharp voices and sharper eyes. 7 board members, 2 legal advisors, 1 silent assistant who never spoke but noticed everything. They moved through the house like inspectors, not guests. I served coffee quietly, my posture neutral, my ears open. "This turnover rate is concerning," one man said, flipping through a tablet. 16 domestic staff in 8 weeks. 15, Richard corrected calmly. "The current maid remains employed." Several eyes shifted toward me. Assessment, dismissal, curiosity. "She won't," another man muttered. I pretended not to hear. They gathered in the dining room, and the door remained open just enough for me to move in and out. "Richard," an older woman at the head of the table began, "investors are nervous. Stability matters." "I'm aware," he replied evenly. "Your behavior suggests distraction. My house staff does not determine my leadership." "It reflects it," she countered. Silence. I refilled water glasses slowly, feeling the tension rise like heat. One of the legal advisors leaned forward. "There are whispers you're unraveling." The word hung there, unraveling. I watched his jaw tighten. "And what exactly," he asked quietly, "constitutes unraveling?" "Erratic decisions, excessive terminations, isolation." The list felt personal. It was personal. I stepped back into the kitchen, heart pounding. This wasn't just about dust and mirrors anymore. This was about control of an empire. 15 firings weren't random. They were evidence. And if they decided he was unstable, they could remove him. I thought about Lillian, about kindness being wealth, about a daughter who stopped speaking. And suddenly I knew what I had to do. It wasn't in my job description. It wasn't safe, but neither was staying silent. I walked back into the dining room carrying a silver tray. My hands were steady. "Excuse me," I said softly. The room paused. Richard's eyes flicked to mine, confused. "Yes," the older woman asked, slightly irritated. "I apologize for interrupting," I continued, "but there's something relevant to this discussion." Richard's expression sharpened. "What are you doing?" he murmured under his breath. "Helping you, I thought." Aloud, I said, "You're discussing staff turnover as evidence of instability." "That's correct," the woman replied. "Then you should know the full context." Every eye was on me now, a maid, speaking in a board meeting. One of the men scoffed. "This is inappropriate." "Maybe," I said calmly, "but accurate." Richard stood slowly. "Naomi, with respect, sir," I said gently, "you hired me for excellence." Silence. He didn't stop me, so I continued. "You're not seeing instability, you're seeing unresolved grief." The word landed like a stone in still water. "Excuse me," someone snapped. 15 maids weren't fired because of incompetence," I said. "They were fired because none of them could replace someone irreplaceable." Richard's face had gone completely still. The older woman narrowed her eyes. "Explain. There was a woman who worked here for 11 years, I said carefully. "She helped raise his daughter. She passed away. Since then, nothing has felt sufficient." The room shifted, not softer, but attentive. "This isn't about poor management," I continued. "It's about a man who built an empire but never learned how to sit with loss." One of the advisors whispered something to another. The older woman leaned back slightly. "And you," she asked coolly, "are qualified to assess this how?" "I'm not," I said honestly. "I'm qualified to observe it." Silence again. I turned slightly toward Richard. "He's not unraveling," I said. "He's human." That word changed the room. Human, billionaires aren't supposed to be that. They're supposed to be strategic, controlled, untouchable, but humanity isn't weakness, it's honesty. Richard's voice broke the silence. "She's correct." All heads turned to him. "I lost someone who mattered," he said calmly, "and I handled it poorly." The admission was quiet, but powerful. "You're admitting instability," one board member pressed. "I'm admitting grief," he replied, "and grief doesn't disqualify leadership." The room was no longer skeptical. It was calculating. He continued. "You want proof of competence? Look at the numbers. Look at the growth. Look at the acquisitions." He gestured toward me. "And look at the fact that the only person who challenged me this quarter is a maid." A faint ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the table. "But she's right," he added. "Control is not healing." Silence again. Then the older woman spoke. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "the issue isn't instability." She looked directly at him. "Perhaps it's isolation." He didn't argue, and something subtle shifted, not victory, but understanding. The meeting continued for another hour, but the tone had changed. It wasn't accusatory anymore. It was strategic. When the cars finally pulled away, the mansion felt lighter, not empty, just different. He stood in the foyer watching the gates close. "You risked your job," he said quietly. "Yes." "Why?" "Because you weren't the only one being tested." He looked at me carefully. "And what did you conclude?" "That you don't need perfect maids." He waited. "You need forgiveness." For a long moment, he didn't respond. Then he said something that surprised me. "Stay." It wasn't an order. It was a request. If you're still with this story, take a second to like and subscribe. Because what happened after that board meeting changed more than just a business. And tell me your name and the city you're watching from in the comments. I want to know who's standing here with me, because the real twist, it hadn't even begun yet, and it was about to shake everything I thought I understood about why I was hired in the first place. After the board cars disappeared down the hill, the mansion didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt exposed. Like something hidden had finally been dragged into daylight. Richard didn't go to his study. He didn't retreat behind glass walls and locked doors. Instead, he walked into the kitchen where I was rinsing untouched coffee cups. "You embarrassed me," he said quietly. I turned off the water. "I know, but you also saved me." I didn't answer that, because saving someone and exposing them sometimes look the same in the beginning. He leaned against the counter, something he'd never done before. Billionaires don't lean, they stand straight, they command space. "You said I needed forgiveness," he continued. "Yes. From who?" The question hung between us. "From yourself," I said, his eyes lowered slightly. "You assume I haven't tried. I assume you've avoided it." Silence. Then he surprised me again. "My daughter's birthday is next week." The shift felt sudden, and she turns 12. I felt something tighten in my chest. "Are you seeing her?" "No," the word was sharp. "She doesn't want to visit." Pain flickered across his face before he hit it. "She says this house reminds her of Lillian." That made sense. Memory lingers in walls. "You ever think maybe she doesn't need the house?" I asked softly. He looked at me. "What does she need?" "You." The answer was simple. But simple things are often the hardest. He stared at the marble floor for a long moment. "I don't know how to be that." Honesty, real honesty, that was new. And that's when I realized something else. He hadn't hired me by accident. There had been hundreds of applicants. The house manager told me that during orientation. But somehow my resume had gone directly to him. Personally reviewed, personally approved. "You read my file, didn't you?" I asked quietly. His eyes lifted. "Yes." "Why?" "You studied psychology," he said. The air shifted, so he had known. "You graduated top of your class." I didn't respond. "You left a doctoral program." That part still stung. "And then," he continued, "you worked service jobs." "Yes." "Why?" "Because scholarships don't cover grief, because my mother got sick, because sometimes survival outruns ambition." But I didn't say all that. "Life changed," I said simply. His gaze held mine. "I didn't hire you because you clean well." My heart beat slower. "I hired you," he said, "because I wanted to see if someone who understood the mind could understand mine." The words settled heavily. "So I was an experiment." "Yes." There it was, not cruelty, strategy. I let the truth sit between us. "You put 15 women through humiliation," I said quietly, "because you were looking for one therapist you didn't have to pay." His jaw tightened. "I paid you." "That's not what I mean." Silence. He straightened slightly. "You could leave," he said, "with compensation." "Because you found what you needed." He didn't answer. And that silence told me everything. He hadn't been firing maids because they weren't perfect. He'd been firing them because they weren't me. The realization should have made me angry. It should have made me feel used. Instead, I felt something more complicated. Seen. And that scared me more than the humiliation ever had. "You should have just hired a consultant," I said softly. "I don't trust consultants." but you trusted a maid. He looked at me carefully. I trusted someone who knew how to survive. That landed deeper than I expected. For the first time, the power dynamic felt different, not equal, but honest. I'm not your solution, I said gently. I know. Then what am I? He hesitated. Proof. Proof of what? That I'm not beyond repair. The vulnerability in his voice wasn't rehearsed, it was real, and that's when the twist truly began. The next evening, a black SUV pulled through the gates unexpectedly. I was in the hallway when I heard raised voices. Not angry, emotional. I stepped toward the foyer. Anne froze. A young girl stood there, braided hair, bright eyes, older now but unmistakable, the same girl from the photograph, his daughter. She looked smaller than I imagined, and braver. Richard stood a few feet away from her, unsure, like a man meeting his own heart for the first time. You came, he said quietly. She didn't answer. Her eyes scanned the house, then landed on me. Who's she? She asked. The question wasn't suspicious, just curious. She works here, he replied. The girl studied me. You're new. Yes, I said softly. She nodded once. Then she said something that stopped both of us. You don't look scared. The air shifted. Richard looked at me sharply. No, I said gently, I'm not. She stepped further inside. Good, she whispered, because what happened next wasn't something either of us were prepared for. If you're still listening, subscribe now because the final part of this story changes everything. And comment your name and the city you're watching from. I want to know who's here for the ending, because when his daughter walked into that mansion, she didn't just come to visit. She came with a truth that would either rebuild him or break him completely. She stood in the foyer like she wasn't sure whether to step forward or run. For a moment, none of us moved. The mansion that once felt too large suddenly felt too small to hold what was happening. Richard looked at his daughter the way a man looks at something fragile he's afraid to touch. You didn't tell me you were coming, he said softly. I didn't tell Mom either, she replied. Her voice wasn't angry, it was careful, like she had learned how to speak around landmines. She walked further inside, her fingers brushing the marble wall as if testing whether it was real. It still smells the same, she murmured. That scent again. Polished wood, artificial flowers, wealth without warmth. Richard swallowed. I can change that. She didn't respond. Her eyes moved through the living room, the staircase, the chandelier, and then she looked at me again. Did he fire you yet? The question hit like glass shattering. Richard flinched. No, I said gently. I'm still here. She nodded slowly. He fired everyone else. I know. She walked toward the study without asking permission. Richard and I followed a few steps behind. When she entered, she stopped in the doorway. The desk. The window. The place where the photograph once stood. She used to sit right there, the girl said quietly, pointing to a small armchair in the corner. Richard's breathing changed. She told me stories when you were gone. Gone, the word hung in the room like smoke. I was working, he said carefully. I know, but the way she said it meant something else. She walked to the desk and noticed the repaired frame. You broke it, she said softly. Richard didn't deny it. Yes. Why? He hesitated. Because I didn't know how to fix anything else. Silence. Heavy. Honest, she looked at him for a long moment. You never said goodbye to her. It wasn't a question, it was a fact. His shoulders dropped slightly. No, he admitted. Why? Because I was building something bigger, he almost said, because I thought there would be time, because billionaires think they can schedule grief. Instead, he said the only true thing left. I was afraid. The word changed everything. For the first time, he wasn't a titan. He was a father, a man, afraid. His daughter stepped closer. I was afraid too, she whispered. That cracked something open in the room. I didn't stop talking because I was mad, she continued. I stopped because I didn't know how to talk without her. Richard's eyes filled, not almost, actually. I thought you blamed me, he said. I did, she replied honestly. A little. The truth didn't destroy him, it steadied him. And then, she added, I blamed myself because I was with her when she got sick. His head snapped up. What? She told me not to tell you how bad it was. She said you had important meetings. The air left his lungs. She didn't want to distract you. The words cut deeper than any boardroom accusation ever could. Kindness is wealth, and Lillian had been wealthy in ways he never measured. Richard sank into the chair behind his desk, not defeated, unarmored. I would have canceled everything, he whispered. I know, his daughter said, and she knew that too. Silence stretched long and sacred. I stood near the doorway, not intruding, but not invisible either. The girl turned to me. She's different, she told her father. Richard looked up slowly. Yes, he said, she is. His daughter stepped toward him. You don't need to fire people to feel strong, she said quietly. I know. You just need to stay. The word echoed through the room. Stay, not build, not control, not perfect. Stay. He stood slowly. Then, carefully, like something priceless, he wrapped his arms around his daughter. She didn't hesitate. She held him back. Not stiff, not cautious, fully, and in that embrace something in the mansion shifted. Not the furniture, not the marble, the energy. For the first time since I had walked through those iron gates, the house felt alive. They stayed like that for a long time. When they finally pulled apart, his daughter looked at me again. Are you going to leave too? She asked. The question carried more weight than she realized. I looked at Richard. He didn't speak. He didn't command. He waited. No, I said softly, I'm not leaving. But not because I was hired as an experiment, not because I needed the job, because something real had begun. Later that evening, we sat at the dining table together, not as employer and employee, not as billionaire and maid, as people. Richard turned to me. I owe you an apology. For what? For using you. The honesty surprised me. You were looking for help, I said, and I found it in someone I underestimated. He didn't sugarcoat it. And now, I asked, now I want to earn it. That was new, earning, not demanding, not buying, earning. His daughter smiled faintly. You should keep her, she said. I plan to, he replied. But this time it wasn't ownership, it was respect. Weeks passed, no one was fired, the board stopped whispering. The mansion changed in small ways. Fresh flowers replaced artificial ones. The scent shifted. The study door stayed open. And on the desk, the photograph remained face up. Not as a wound, as memory. One evening, as I prepared to leave for the night, Richard stopped me in the foyer. I spoke to a university today, he said. I looked at him. They're reinstating your doctoral admission. The world went quiet. What? You shouldn't be polishing silver. I blinked. I chose to be here. Yes, he said gently, but you don't have to stay here forever. The offer wasn't charity, it was acknowledgement. You don't owe me that, I said. I know. He paused. But she would have done the same. Kindness is wealth. Lillian's words echoed again, and for the first time, I understood the real twist of this entire story. I wasn't hired to fix him. I was hired to remind him. And in reminding him, I found myself again too. So here's what I learned. Sometimes the loudest power is the most fragile. Sometimes humiliation hides pain. And sometimes the person in the uniform holds the most education in the room. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel right now. Stories like this matter. And tell me your name and the city you're watching from in the comments below. I read them. I truly do. Because wealth isn't marble floors or boardroom votes. Wealth is the moment a father chooses to stay, and the moment a maid realizes she was never just a maid at all. And that was the day a billionaire stopped firing people and finally started healing.